record. Okay, thank you. Yes, buddy. Thank you for reminding me, Patrick. And then we did also ask both our Kansas and Missouri. It sounds like we have people from both sides of the border tonight. So we did ask our wildlife specialists again on both sides of the border about regulations for wildlife control. So we have videos from them too. And by the way, these videos are all available on our website. So if you don't catch everything tonight, you can watch it again and share it with colleagues and so on as well. Then we'll talk about field scouting and pre-harvest assessment. So, so we're first going to start with how to try to keep them out of the fields. And then the next step is, when you're harvesting, you do have to look to see if wildlife got in or not, and then, adjust accordingly based on if you see that or not. So then we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about establishing buffer zones. So again, if there is species in the field, what do you do? Like, how big of a buffer zone should you give of not picking? Like, where's your no pick zone around that feces that you see in the field? So we'll talk about that. Then we'll also talk about how you can remove the feces from the field. So again, if your wildlife control measures, aren't quite as successful as you'd like, then how do we keep the feces, what do we do with the feces that is there? So, and then I put the evaluation in there to remind myself to put that in the chat when we're done tonight. So, come on. Okay, so those of you that have heard us, Patrick or myself, speak about our cow, Jamerson, who couldn't make it tonight, but he's still with us at K-State, just couldn't be here tonight. Who've heard us speak about produce safety before have probably seen this slide before. When we think about produce and think about all the different things that go into the safety of the produce, the soil, the water, building equipment, humans, animals is one thing that we need to think about. So that's what we're going to be focused on tonight is those animals and how they contribute. Joshua, just a minute, honey. So first we're going to talk a little bit about domesticated and wild animals. Tonight we're just talking about the wild animal side, but just a reminder of why wild animals are important to thinking about produce safety. They can carry and transmit human pathogens to produce. Sorry. So just a minute, buddy. Just a minute. Mama's just about done. Sorry, Daddy is off. And okay, here you go, buddy. Okay. So wildlife can transmit pathogens to produce. So that's why we're talking about it from a produce safety perspective. So we just have to think about how to prevent that from happening, and then what to do if it does happen, as I've mentioned. So we're going to start off tonight by, and if you have questions throughout the night, please feel free to just jump in. Again, we're a small group, and we probably won't take up the entire hour. So if you have questions, jump in. But we're going to start by talking about showing a video on wildlife and bird control. So this one was done by our extension wildlife specialist on the Kansas side, who just retired. But I'm going to stop my sharing so that Patrick can share his screen. He's going to show the video for us here.
I'm Charlie Lee with Kansas State University. I'm the Extension Wildlife Specialist. Today we're going to talk a little bit about control of damage at vegetable gardens. And I usually encourage people to follow the acronym HER. H would go for habitat modification. Can you remove the things that the animal finds useful in your situation? That is usually food, cover, or in some cases, water. Then we would go to E. E is exclusion. Can you use some sorts of fencing material, like the electric fence, physical barrier, the poultry wire netting at the bottom, or the electrical charge on that, which would be a psychological barrier rather than a physical barrier? That would be exclusion. You can also use some things that would be chemicals as repellents, or other techniques would be the use of decoys or acoustic deterrents, like what I'm going to show here next. This would be a propane cannon, which is good for scaring birds and deer from fields. Unfortunately, most wildlife species cease to be impacted after a few days of a constant noise. When the novelty wears off, then it ceases to be effective. So to increase the effectiveness of these, they need to be moved from a corner of the field on an every other day basis or pointed in a different direction. Since the propane cannon shoots out a small flame, you want to make sure that it's not down on something combustible. Propane cannons are available from a couple of different sources in the United States. Look online, I'm sure you can find those sources. They vary in cost depending on the complexity and the length of time that they are effective. Those that cost more seem to have something other than a random generator to cause them to activate and may even actually move on their own on a recorded basis. Another technique for frightening wildlife is the use of bird bombs. In this particular case, it's a 15 millimeter pistol. It's a starter pistol that's been modified. You put a 22 caliber blank in. You insert the cartridge into the barrel with the opened end in order to reduce risk to yourself. Usually wear a leather glove, extend your arm to full extent, and then turn your face away from the barrel of the firearm. Whistle bombs work pretty good to disperse birds when they come in large flocks.
Great, thank you, Patrick. And you can just leave that up, Patrick. I won't bother to go back to the slide. So, so just a kind of a quick review of that particular video. So the thing that I really learned from that is to think about the HER. So habitat modification, so removing food sources, removing cover, removing water is all ways that you can help to reduce the wildlife from being there or wanting to be there. Then exclusion is kind of the next level down. Thinking about fencing, as you can see, this was recorded and Nancy knows this place well. It was recorded at the Olathe Horticulture Research Center, where they have a lot of fencing because they want to keep their research trials going. But and Charlie also, he didn't really talk about it in this video, but you can also use things like repellents and decoys, and then removal. So we're now going to go, we have a number of more videos here. So the next video that we're going to show is again, this is really for birds again. So this time Cal Jamerson is going to talk about using an air ranger for controlling birds. So go ahead, Patrick.
So one example for wildlife and animal control is if you have strawberries or other crops, they're very hard to keep out. What you see behind me is an air ranger with mylar tape attached to the head and hands. The constant changing texture and the light reflection from the mylar tape is a natural deterrent to birds. When we did our wildlife scouting, we found at the tree brush that birds were habitating in large quantities. We set up the air ranger to scare and deter.
Thanks, Patrick. So, so that's another option. I wish I remembered now how much that air ranger cost. The biggest challenge, of course, with the air ranger is you need to have electricity for something like that particular one out wherever you're using it. So, you have to have a generator out at the field or, whatever, you have to have electricity for that. But I know, as Cal said, they're very effective for controlling birds if you're having bird issues. And my kids love them. They're a lot of fun for kids to see too. So, and I think it was in the range of $150 or something like that. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but so it wasn't super expensive, but again, the electricity source is kind of the bigger challenge there. So the next video that we're going to show is on repellents and then raccoon control. And I'm going to try to remember. Yeah, so the fourth video we'll show is on rodents specifically. So I know Neil mentioned possums. So, but this one we're going to talk about just using repellents, like we talked about that exclusion. You know, we have the H for habitat modification, the E for exclusion. So repellents is one way that you can do exclusion. So he'll talk about the repellents in this video, as well as controlling raccoons, which I know growing up on a farm, we always had an issue with raccoons and sweet corn. So anyway, go ahead and take it away, Patrick.
Exclusion can also be done with chemical repellents. It does not have to be a physical barrier. Oftentimes you can repel wildlife from an area by putting up a smell or an odor that either causes the plant to taste bad or reminds the animal that one of their predators is nearby. Another species that often causes problems for vegetable gardeners is raccoons. They're very common. They do very well as a generalist, and you solve them the same way. Habitat modification, remember the HER acronym, E for exclusion or R for removal. If we're trying to use physical exclusion techniques, often a 3-wire or 4-wire electric fence is great. Want to make sure that the bottom wire is no more than 3 to 4 inches off of the ground. I've seen them be effective with 2 wires, but typically when we're talking about electric fences, the more wires, the taller it is, the more effective it's going to be for the most species. When exclusion does not work, then go up the scale to the removal. Oftentimes you can catch raccoons in cage traps, like this trap, works very well. There are many other styles of traps out there that are specific for raccoons. And then in Kansas, we always have the option of lethal removal with the use of firearms. So those would be the techniques that I would use when considering solving raccoon problems. Oftentimes people want to capture raccoons or other problem wildlife in cage traps and then release them somewhere else. The problem is, where do you take them? It takes a skilled biologist to develop good habitat. And some species like raccoons probably survive better than others. But let's say a species like a squirrel, a tree squirrel, that caches food in the winter, for the winter. Then you remove that animal from its home range. It doesn't know where food supplies are. It doesn't know where a nest is available. And it doesn't know where the predators are more likely to come from. So oftentimes you sentence those animals to a very slow death and it's not actually doing them a favor by letting them live in a new location where they struggle against predators, lack of food, and lack of cover.
Great, thank you. I have to say from that video, I really appreciated his comments on the removal option. You know, and I'm not an expert in this area, but that's why, you know, we wanted to ask people that have that expertise to share with us. And I will mention too that he talked about the Kansas regulations about wildlife removal. And we also have a recording in a minute from our Missouri wildlife specialist that'll talk about the regulations on the Missouri side as well. Okay, so the next video that we'll go to here is on small rodent management. So we hear a lot from produce growers about voles. Again, Neil mentioned possums. So Patrick's going to go ahead and play our small rodent management video now.
We often have a problem with small rodents with vegetable growers. The R, remember, stands for removal. That can be trap and release, trap and relocate, or trap and euthanize. Most of the time, it's trap and euthanize, particularly on small rodents. Voles, the population can get very large fairly quickly. It's a very cyclical population. At times, the numbers of voles can get over 100 to 200 per acre. They do well with a lot of habitat that provides them overhead cover. The things in a vegetable garden that provide that habitat is a lot of vegetative leaf litter on the surface or the moisture or weed barrier fabric that's often used. That's ideal overhead cover for voles, who then use that to avoid predators. When you're talking about voles, oftentimes they're caught in snap traps or small Sherman type cage traps. Snap traps are these larger wooden-based rat traps. Since voles are in colonies, it's pretty easy to find where the trails are. You set the trap right in front of the burrow opening, because most of the time the vole burrow will either be in the leaf litter or go underground. And those are very easy to locate. And since the voles are in colonies, usually in a small section of the garden, there may be 20 to 30 voles in a small area, and then some area where there are no voles. So just trap the colonies. Exclusion can also be done with chemical repellents. It does not have to be a physical barrier. Oftentimes you can repel wildlife from an area by putting up a smell or an odor that either causes the plant to taste bad or reminds the animal that one of their predators is nearby.
All right, great, thank you. So, so from that one, again, we just, remember again, the habitat modification, exclusion, and then removal options that you have for rodents and possums and other small rodents. Okay. Let's see. So I think we'll go through 2 more videos and then we can kind of have a break for questions, because we'll kind of be done with kind of the wildlife control side of things. So so next, Patrick's going to pull up our Kansas regulations for controlling wildlife. So we'll watch that one, and then we will watch the Missouri regulations for controlling wildlife after that. So go ahead, thanks.
In Kansas, the state legislature has developed a statute, 32-1002, that does not prevent landowners or legal occupants from taking wildlife when found in or near buildings or destroying property, subject to some provisions. Those provisions are that it cannot be a federally protected species, which is migratory birds or threatened and endangered species. You cannot take possession with the animal with intent to use, meaning you can't sell the carcass or use the animal carcass for food, and you must have made reasonable attempts to control the damage before lethally taking the animal. That's a statutory right developed by Kansas state legislature. You need to be careful. Remember, the statute said reasonable. You must have made a reasonable attempt to control the damage before killing the animal, particularly when that pertains to big game animals like deer. It's always best to get a depredation permit from the Department of Wildlife and Parks in Kansas. They will send a biologist out, look at the situation, recommend some techniques, and if those are not effective, issue you up to 6 depredation permits to take and utilize deer. It doesn't have to be done by you as the landowner or the legal occupant. You can issue those permits to a designated agent so that then the deer can be utilized outside of the legal hunting seasons.
Thanks, Patrick. And then Patrick, if you want to show the Missouri regulations video that you have as well.
Yes, I'm Bob Pierce, MU Extension Wildlife and Fisheries Specialist here in Columbia, Missouri, and work for MU Extension. And, we know that most landowners enjoy having wildlife on their property and enjoy observing wildlife and maybe hunting as well. But we also know that sometimes certain species could cause property damage and become a nuisance or even economic damages with some of our vegetable and fruit production objectives and other crop objectives. But fortunately, we have resources that can help you resolve these problems through many of our MU extension guides, as well as other resources from Kansas State. But also here in Missouri, it's important that we have knowledge of the provisions that are in place that can protect our state's wildlife resource. And those are found in the Missouri Wildlife Code that is developed by the Missouri Department of Conservation. The code provides provisions for taking wildlife during prescribed hunting and trapping seasons that we're all used to, the wildlife regulations of hunting and fishing, but also when wildlife are causing damage. The Code of Conduct, or the Code of Missouri, is available from the Department of Conservation websites, but in essence, it allows for landowners to protect their property from wildlife damage. And if wildlife are damaging your crop, you or your representative, which could be a relative or a friend or neighbor or someone that you designate, can take action and control those species. Now, there are some exceptions. Migratory birds or white-tailed deer or elk, we have elk in Missouri, wild turkeys, other species cannot be taken without consultation with the Missouri Department of Conservation. And the person that's best to contact with that organization is your local conservation agent. And they can provide guidance and resources to help you solve your problem. Again, it's important to follow the wildlife code and also to take action when appropriate. But also, I think, realize that sometimes it's good to tolerate some damage and be a little more flexible if you can, but also recognize that wildlife can certainly cause damage to your operation, and then action can be taken to solve the problem.
So much, Patrick. Appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask about the kind of the wildlife control side, the regulation side, and then we'll go into more what you do if you do find evidence of wildlife. But so just wanted to see if anybody has questions before we go into that side of things.
So he didn't talk about like the most effective ways to control voles. Did he? I know I've taken classes where he's talked about moles and gone into how to trap them and how to stem, but what are all the ways that you can control voles? They just eat the sweet potatoes up just a lot.
Patrick, do you mind commenting on that? Do you have any comments you want to share, Patrick?
Sure. Yeah. So voles, as I think was mentioned, as Charlie mentioned, are cyclic in nature. And it's useful right off the bat to do some trapping during the season to get a feel for what the numbers are. And you can use just regular snap traps. Baiting them with peanut butter works quite well to catch voles. You also want to look for evidence of the voles themselves. You're looking for runs. There's at least two species of voles, the meadow vole and the pine vole, found in Missouri and Kansas. There may be another species in western Kansas, but at any rate, in the area that I work with, there's two species. One is at the surface, one is just below the surface, and you can usually scope out where they are because they leave runs. And especially in the spring, if you've had some snow cover, you can very clearly see their runs after the snow melts. And that gives you a clue that they're active in a particular area. Now, what do you do for them? Well, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. First thing is to do what you can to provide habitat for their natural predators. Screech owls, barred owls, various hawk species will all predate on voles. Having a cat around, a cat will catch voles. If you're able to promote coyote populations and bobcat populations, they too will feed on voles, and so will black snakes. All of these are their natural predators, and they're helpful in controlling numbers. There are some poison baits that can be used for voles, but be sure that you read the label carefully on whatever bait you choose, because there are many baits that cannot be legally used actually in a production field or in a high tunnel. You could use them in areas around production fields, but not within the production fields. So read the label carefully. There's a number of different types of poison baits. Some are based on zinc phosphate. Some are based on, what's the other chemical? Chloramphenicone. And, you have several to choose from. But it typically takes a multi-pronged approach to manage voles. And then, some of the things that we do in farming just sort of promote the numbers of voles. For example, using heavy mulches or even using weed barrier fabric or even plastic mulch will provide good habitat for voles near crop plants. So you want to be very vigilant and try to head off issues. And I feel your pain from the standpoint of sweet potatoes. I've worked with a number of farmers who've had serious vole issues in sweet potatoes, especially sweet potatoes in high tunnels. So I feel your pain there. But Londa, I guess that's what I would say about voles.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we get a lot of questions about voles. That's a very common one that I've heard questions about. So yeah, thank you, Patrick. Anybody else want to ask any questions about kind of the wildlife control side before we go over to the side of what to do if you do see the wildlife there? Okay, great. Well, we will go ahead and keep going then, but if you do think of questions, please go ahead and ask. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. No. So yeah, go ahead and ask if you do have a question, if you think of one. So let's start here again.
I'll mention that I dropped a link to a publication from University of Missouri Extension on vole management. It's in the chat, so if anyone wants to copy that, it's there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's excellent, because yeah, I think the more resources we can share on controlling things like that, the better. So thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. So now we're gonna actually, I guess I'll have to unshare again, but we're gonna go into now. Okay, so we've talked about how do you try to control the wildlife in your growing area as much as possible. So now, what do you do next? So I'm gonna stop sharing again, and I'm gonna let Patrick go ahead and share the next video on field scouting for contaminants.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've lost that screen. Let me unshare and find it.
Yeah, sorry, lots of sharing and unsharing tonight, sorry.
No problem. Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Cal Jamerson. I'm the Produce Safety Associate with Kansas State University Research and Extension. Today we're going to be talking about scouting fields for wildlife and potential contaminants and the steps you should take as a grower in response. The first thing we're going to talk about is supplies. When you're scouting your field for feces or potential contaminants, the basics are a bucket for getting them out of the field, a shovel, and I also like the trowels for smaller contaminants. Also, you want to have flags, and we're going to go over this in greater detail after we scout the field and drop the flags. A note on color coordinating, you'll notice the bucket is black, the shovel is black with black tape on it, the trowel is black with black tape on it. You can pick any color you want. Red's pretty common when you're dealing with contaminants. The reason you want to have a dedicated color when dealing with this is so you don't have cross-contamination with your post-harvest harvesting equipment versus stuff you're getting contaminants and feces out of the field in. When you're doing field scouting, I would encourage using a 2-flag system. The red being for when a feces or contaminant is present, and a yellow being if you see heavy signs of tracks feeding, rooting, where there's not actually a contaminant, but you want your harvesters to be aware that there could be a potential contaminant nearby. In this walkthrough, I noticed bird feces on the plastic, not on the produce itself. So when I scout the field, I go through and drop all my flags, and then I come back for the removal cleanup. In this scenario, when it's not on the produce or the plant, what I do is I would use a wet one or Clorox wipe away from the plant, get it off the plastic, check the surrounding area, know what my weather's been the past few days, and then once that contaminant's been removed, I'm gonna switch to a yellow flag. The reason being is I still want my harvesters to know in this area there was a contaminant, to be extra cautious when they're harvesting. You do not have to do a 2-flag system. It's just something I encourage. Another example we gave in the previous recording is when there was feces outside of the bed, I dropped the red flag. Then when we remove it, the weather was fine. There was no heavy rain, no heavy wind. So in that case, after I remove that feces from the field, I'm gonna switch to a yellow flag. So the harvesters know everything in there can still be harvested, just be extra cautious at that point.
I'm Patrick Byers, Horticulture Field Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. Well, we've identified evidence of animal egress in the produce field. What do we do now? Well, the first step, of course, is to do a good, thorough walkthrough in advance of harvest and to mark any physical evidence of egress. It's also important to make sure that everyone who is going to be contacting produce, particularly during harvest, is trained on what to look for. The more eyes you have on the situation, the more effective will be your pre-harvest inspection. So once you've identified feces in the field, then it's important, obviously, to mark that with a distinctive flag, and then to determine what's called the buffer zone, and that's the area around the feces where there could be potential contamination. Now, what should that buffer zone be? Well, the guidance that we have is it could be anywhere from 0 to 25 feet, and that's quite a range. Some of the things to take into consideration, first of all, the characteristics of the feces themselves. Are they loose and watery? Is it likely that there was a splat factor? Could it have moved beyond where you physically see it? What has the weather been like? Has it rained since the feces were deposited? Is the wind blowing where there could have been wind-blown movement of the feces? These are all things to consider when determining what the buffer zone should be.
Great, thank you, Patrick. So, so some kind of summary of what we learned about in that video. Looking for signs of contamination. So, make sure that you're looking if you're seeing feces is an obvious one, but, tracks and that sort of thing is, means there's potential there for having contamination. Using flags, we tried to make it pretty clear in the video that it's not required, but it's a good idea. You can do different, you can handle it differently, I guess, but flags is a good way to let everybody know, okay, there was feces here, don't harvest around here. And then establishing buffer zones, and Patrick can talk about that better than I can, but for those of you that have taken the FSMA PSA training, the Produce Safety Alliance training, you know that it says from 0 to 25 feet, like Patrick said, that's a huge range. So you have to kind of evaluate based on the situation, where is it likely that there could be contamination on the produce? Like, would I want to feed my 4-year-old that strawberry that was right next to, cow feces? No. But, so you kind of have to take different things into consideration of what's reasonable, that you're not going to get people sick, but you're also not wasting produce that, could be safely sold to people. So that's kind of the considerations for buffer zones. There's no, unfortunately, easy answer because it depends on the situation. So let me see here. So our next video that we're going to show is on pre-harvest assessments. So, and this one is a short one, but we're going to talk kind of about record keeping as well. So, so what do you do before you harvest to look to see if there's any evidence of wildlife? So go ahead. Thank you.
One component of the produce safety rule is it requires a visual assessment prior to harvesting. While a written record is not a requirement to achieve that, on our website, if you just Google Produce Safety K-State, a toolkit will be your first return. You will find all these various logs and templates. Here's a pre-harvest checklist. It's designed to be a yes/no questionnaire. It's simply a reminder of what you're looking for when you're doing your pre-harvest scout. And then you can make notes that apply to the field here. One approach you can take to this is that Google Earth image I talked about, and you do a front back printout. So as you go, it's 2-in-1. You can mark on the field where the events happened and the steps you're going to take in response to it. So now that we've done our field scouting and identified the points of fecal contamination, the reason I'm a big fan of logbooks is you can identify on the field where it happened. Typically, when you're scouting, you're going to look for ingress and egress into the field. And when following the tracks through, we see a pattern up here. The reason this is beneficial is over time, if you're having the same pattern, you know something's going on in this area causing your wildlife concern. It will help you when identifying what actions to take in response to wildlife.
Thank you. So when we're thinking about, doing a pre-harvest assessment, this is, relevant for everybody, no matter if you're selling the produce or what size of grower you are. The record keeping, like you talked about, the produce safety rule, that's if you're covered by the produce safety rule. It's always a good idea to keep records, though, of course. And it can help you, like you said, to identify problems. Oh, I always have problems here in this corner. What's going on in that corner? Is there a food source for the animals, in that corner? Or, what's happening there that I can maybe adjust so that I can keep the wildlife out of that corner. So, okay, so the next video that we have here, and this is, I believe, the last one. Yes, this will be the last one we'll show tonight. Hope you aren't getting tired of all the videos. Is removing feces from the growing area. So this one is, if you do get feces in the growing area, which, it's going to happen. I grew up on a farm, and so I get it. Feces happens. So then what do you do? So Patrick's going to go ahead and play that one.
We're going to go to the actual removal process. This is where it's handy to have a good size shovel and a little trowel. The feces here, you can tell it's fresh. It hasn't been stepped on. There's been no rain the last 2 days, and the wind pattern's okay. So personally, in this scenario, you can do a smaller buffer zone, and all you're going to do is physically remove the feces from the field. Once you've done that, you're going to put your flag back. Even though there's no fecal contamination, it's a good visual cue for harvesters to know that something did happen in this specific area. So when they're going about their day-to-day harvest, they know to be extra aware of their environment for feces.
While we tend to focus on feces from mammals when we do the field inspection, we also need to keep an eye out for bird feces. And as we can see here, we have an example of bird feces on the plastic. Pretty straightforward to clean that up. There's very little peripheral spread. So using an antiseptic wipe, we can just basically make sure that we remove the evidence of the feces and disinfect the area where it was deposited. Once you've done this, of course, this will need to be disposed of as contaminated material, and you want to immediately wash your hands with soap and single-use towels, and if necessary, use a hand sanitizer.
Great, thank you. So there we learned just how to safely remove feces from the growing area. So, whether you end up with mammal feces or whether you end up with bird feces, which again, both can happen, how you can safely remove them was kind of the moral of that video there. So, all right, I will go ahead and share my screen now because I think we're done with the videos. Okay. So again, just, I showed this slide at the beginning, but, just to review that, the reason why we are concerned about wildlife control, in addition to the obvious economic damage, many of you kind of talked about that in our introductions. Obviously deer can sure eat a lot of berries or eat a lot of whatever the product is. or rabbits or voles or whatever it is. So, in addition to the economic damage that's caused by wildlife, it can also transmit pathogens, human pathogens, to the produce and then therefore the people that are eating it. So, we just don't want the wildlife to be a vector for contamination to the people eating the produce. So, again, we've talked about all these different things, preventing, monitoring, and then if you do have contamination, then what do we do? So, and don't harvesting produce that's been visibly contaminated with feces is of course very important. So here's our K-State produce safety website, and because I work for both K-State and MU, all the information that's on here, a lot of the fact sheets do have both MU and K-State colors on them, and the videos have both logos on them, and as you can see, had people from both universities recorded in the videos. So so even though it's a K-State website, really encourage our Missouri growers to use that as well. Just for me, it's logistically easier to put everything on one website, and our K-State website just because of the person that updates it, she does it really fast. And so I've just put it all in one place. But that website is a great source of information. All the videos that we showed tonight are available on there. I think the boxes have changed a little from the screenshot, but it's called guidance, I think, produce safety guidance. So when you go to that website, you'll be able to hunt down and you can find the videos. We have recordings of webinars on there and lots of information on FSMA, on the Food Safety Modernization Act, which are regulations. We also have information on good agriculture practices. If you need to get certified, GAP certified, if a buyer asks you to do that, that's available on there. All our upcoming trainings are listed on there. So, just a number of different resources are available on that website. One thing I want to make sure I do highlight tonight, again, this is relevant for both states, is something called an on-farm readiness review. So if you're selling produce, we don't currently do these particular opportunity for people that are not selling produce, but if you're selling produce, you can have what's called an on-farm readiness review where both the regulators, so KDA or MDA, as the case may be, and then the extension personnel, so K-State or MU extension, can come to your farm and then walk through and just look at all the produce safety practices on your farm. So this is a great opportunity to have. Patrick has done, I think, 40 or 50 of these on the Missouri side, so he's done lots of these. Cal's done quite a few on the Kansas side. So this is a great way that you can have the regulator come in a non-regulatory capacity. So they're there on an educational visit. They're not there to regulate you on that visit. They're there to educate. They can help look for any problems or areas of concern that you might have. It's voluntary. But the only things that we do ask is that you have to have gone to a FSMA PSA training first. And we'll have more of those coming up. We have the second half of one tomorrow, but we'll have more coming up in the future as well. And then you also do need to just register with KDA or MDA, as the case may be, as a produce farm as well. So to be in their list. That registering with KDA or MDA does not necessarily mean that you're going to get an inspection. If you register with them, it just means that they know that you're there. And if you can honestly indicate that you are selling less than $25,000 worth of produce per year, then you would be exempt, and then they won't, call you again. So we do encourage people to register with, the relevant regulatory authority in your state, whether it's Kansas or Missouri. So really, again, just encourage people to take advantage of that on-farm readiness review. It's a free opportunity to have regulators and extension educators come to your farm to help with answering questions. I want to just give a quick advertisement. I do this often, but just want to make sure that people do know that we offer free water testing to both Kansas and Missouri growers. So If you're on either side of the border, you can get your water tested for free. If you're selling produce, you can get your water tested for free. We only test for microbial content of the water, though we don't do like pH or electrical conductivity or those or heavy metals, but we do the microbial water testing. In Kansas, you can bring it either to our lab at K-State Olathe or to Manhattan to Call Hall where the ice cream is. It's the water testing lab is upstairs. And then in Missouri, you can go through your local public health department. You can get the bottles there, and then also you can bring the bottles back there. There's more information on our website on this as well, so you can get more details there, but wanted to make sure I just encourage people to use this. It's always good to know the quality of your water that you're using for irrigation or mixing chemicals if you use them, and then also for post-harvest use. So really encourage you to do that. If you need to meet the FSMA regulations or GAP requirements, this water testing will work. And just if you're wanting to sell safe produce, this water testing is important for you as well. And just to note, other upcoming trainings, if you're interested, we have a GAPS food safety plan workshop. This is particularly if you're wanting to get GAPS certified or just if you're wanting to do a better job of record keeping related to produce safety. That workshop's on April 21 from 3 to 5. You can see there. We have an introduction to produce safety and post-harvest handling. So that's on May 10. We'll be doing a video tour of a farm there and also just talking more about both the produce safety side as well as how to better handle your produce for quality as well. And then we'll be scheduling some more FSMA PSA trainings and then other trainings as well in the future. We just haven't set those dates yet, but we will be eventually here. If anybody is interested in getting GAPS certified, we do have a GAPS cost share funding available in both sides of the border as well. And again, I mentioned the free water testing. So here's our contact information for both Patrick and myself. And you can definitely contact us and ask questions if you have any questions of us. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can put the evaluation link in the chat box. But we can definitely take questions. Any questions that anybody might have?
I have a question. I know you can't see my hand up.
Go ahead.
So is there a maturity of fruit stage that it doesn't matter if a bird poops on it? Like if you have a strawberry and it's just in flowering stage, you have a strawberry where it's just the size of a dime and it's green versus, all the stages up to red. When is there a time where, okay, now it matters?
Patrick, I saw you unmuting, Patrick. Do you want to take that one?
Poop is poop, right? And if you see it on the part of the crop that you're going to harvest, then the way the produce safety rule reads is that should not be harvested. Now, you're more than likely going to, part of the requirement of the produce safety rule is to do a pre-harvest assessment, to do a walk through the field before you harvest. And that, of course, is when you're particularly tuned into looking for poop or manure on produce items. Yes, you might see, as you said, it on a green strawberry when it's the size of a dime. The issue there is we really don't know how long the potential contaminating organisms can survive on that strawberry. And it's much, much better to err on the side of caution. Pick that strawberry off and destroy it and then wash your hands. That would be my guidance on it. Londa, you may want to comment as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, like Patrick said, the reality is poop is still poop. And, really we think about it, it would be the same as raw manure. If you're applying raw manure, if it's touching the harvestable portion, so the strawberry, we would recommend waiting. The National Organic Program recommends waiting 120 days. So, unfortunately, from the time that the strawberry sets or the tomato sets, it's probably going to be less than 120 days, before harvesting. So, yeah, for safety's sake, like Patrick said, I would recommend picking off that strawberry and then disposing of it. And then, you can still proceed after that. But yeah, unfortunately, it's it's just like raw manure on the produce. So
Thank you. That just makes it, you could have a flock of birds, starlings fly over, and poop on your whole field, and then it rains 3 days later, and you've been out of town for 5 days, and you would never know.
yeah, and that's the reality. Go ahead, Patrick.
But before I forget, I wanted to mention that if you want to watch another video, I dropped a video on vole management into the chat as well that we did earlier for our commercial horticulture newsletter.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's, I think, like I said earlier, I feel like the more tools we have to help control those things, the better. So thank you. Any other questions anybody has? Or any comments anybody wants to make quick? And like I said, I did put the evaluation in the chat. If you don't mind just filling it out, letting us know how we can improve, how we can make this better for next time. And it's always useful for our reporting to be able to get funding to be able to put on these sort of webinars to have some sort of documentation of if you've learned anything. And but we definitely want any suggestions you have for improvement as well. Great. Well, please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, or if you would like to ask about the water testing, or ask about any other of the things that we talked about. And please, again, make sure you feel free to look at our produce safety website. I'm going to pop that in the chat here really quick too, if you want to take a look at that. And good, it looks like people are appreciating it. So here's the produce safety website. One other thing while I have you on the call, sorry, I'm trying to get to it now and it's not working at the moment, but we do have and some of you might have already filled it out. We have a water survey that we're looking for a response as well, because we're wanting to develop more resources related to water. And of course, that's not coming up quickly now, but anyway, we appreciate, here, I'll try to pull it up really quick. I think I got it. So here it is. If anybody is interested, you can win a chance to win one of two $50 gift cards if you fill out if you fill this out. I think that's right, the two $50 gift cards. So really appreciate your everybody's attendance tonight. And like I said, please feel free to contact us later if you have any questions. And we finished 1 minute before 7, so everybody can get on with their evening now. So, all right, thanks everybody for joining. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.